It was a real pleasure to finally take a hot shower. The young man enjoyed the fact that hot water now flowed from the tap immediately. He didn't have to wait several hours for it. The guy was also very happy that the air conditioning was now working and a light cool breeze was available at any time. Walking up to the window and drying my head with a towel after a shower, the guy was also happy to see the clear blue sky and said that happiness was in these things and the feeling was different, not like in that world. It was 2025. The guy thought about this and started pondering what he'd do first. He thought it would be a good idea to play StarCraft, but he didn't immediately notice the monster behind the glass. Turning to the window, the guy screamed in fear of seeing a monster there and fell back. The young man could not understand what kind of creature he was seeing and suddenly heard a siren, and then a voice from a loudspeaker calling for the attention of all residents of the house. They explained over the loudspeaker that a corrosive crack had appeared inside the residential complex, but the young man didn't understand what the hell it was. A voice over the loudspeaker called for all residents to evacuate to the shelter. Hearing this, the young man panicked and began cursing, still not understanding what was happening. The young man's gaze fell again on the window and immediately reflected the horror he was experiencing. The soft blue sky turned blood red and dozens of terrifying monsters crawled across the glass. The young man noticed that the glass could no longer withstand the pressure and could burst at any moment under the pressure of the mass of these monsters. Don't think about it for long. The young man jumped up and ran to the stairs. As soon as the young man ran out of his room, the glass finally gave in and burst, and the monsters burst into the apartment. While running away from the monsters, the young man continued to wonder what kind of creatures had suddenly appeared in his house. The monsters ran after the young man. Their faces looked more like the masks you'd find in a toy store. The young man understood that he simply wouldn't be able to escape from the monsters, so he decided to outsmart them by jumping out the window, clinging to the windowsill, and simply waiting for them to pass by. As soon as the monsters disappeared, the young man climbed back inside. The young man breathed a sigh of relief, glad that he had finally gotten away from the monsters. Unexpectedly for himself, the young man saw a little boy who was also glad to see a man. The young man ran up to the boy and asked him to quickly go to the shelter, but he began to ask where the monsters went. The boy looked very confident and declared that he wanted to kill all the monsters. What's even more surprising is that the boy invited the young man to follow him, which greatly surprised him. The boy insisted that he did not sing in the shelter, and the young man could not leave him alone and thus joined him. The boy spent the entire journey talking about what was happening on Earth, and at some point the young man decided to clarify whether he had understood everything correctly. According to the boy, corrosive cracks appeared on the ground, which were the exits from which monsters crawled out, and no one knew where they came from or where and when the next one might appear. The boy was very disappointed, having gone through hell to return to Earth, and now finding that it too had become a hellhole. The young man began cursing the goddess, who apparently wasn't enough of his suffering. The boy was very surprised that such a grown guy as his new companion knew nothing about the corrosive faults and asked about it, and learned that until that moment he had lived for a long time in America where such things had never happened. The boy was very surprised to hear that his companion was from America, noting that the American president had been removed from office for secretly sending his daughter to Korea and was now unable to get there, although this fact was very strange. The young man decided to change the subject and asked the boy who his favorite hunter was, and he enthusiastically named Lee Se-yong. The boy said that Lee Se-ona was from the Yanabai Guild, which ranked 10th in the entire land. This hunter's main weapon was a two-handed sword, and at that very moment she was dealing with a corrosive rift in Che-1. The guy was very glad that he managed to change the topic and wondered whether he had ended up in the world where he came from, not understanding how everything that was happening could even be possible. The boy did not stop talking and talked about his favorite huntress and admired her mastery of a two-handed sword. At one point, the boy declared that his new companion was obliged to see a video of his favorite hunter on YouTube, but he was rudely shut up. The young man heard some rustling around the corner of the corridor and stopped the boy. Carefully looking around the corner, the young man saw that there was a lot of monster there. Taking a closer look, the guy managed to count the monsters, and it turned out that there were 6 of them. Assessing his capabilities, the young man decided that his physical strength seemed above average. He was used to fighting numerous enemies, but that wasn't the problem. The boy didn't understand what to do with the child. He knew that leaving him alone would inevitably result in something bad happening. Besides, the child's courage had vanished, and he began to tremble with fear at the sight of the monster. The young man also thought about the fact that he did not have a normal weapon to fight the monsters. Concentrating, the young man noticed that some kind of energy similar to mana was flying in the air. Now the young man was convinced that everything on Earth had become exactly the same as in the world from which he had returned. Now the young men had no doubts about how to act in order to avoid dying and deal with the monsters. With complete confidence, the young man emerged from around the corner and immediately attacked the monsters. The mana that the young man had been saving for 20 years was no longer there, but it was in the air and he could use it. The young man decided that he could use the paradox engraved on his soul in the flame, and although the damage from it was a little disappointing, it was a very good result. In a moment, the guy managed to deal with all the monsters and his strength was more than enough. The boy, seeing what his companion was capable of, began to shout with delight and admitted that at first he treated him with distrust because he knew nothing, but noted that he nevertheless had a unique skill. The boy said that on the official YouTube channel of hunters, they said that it was important to always make a finishing blow to the enemy, and ran towards one of the monsters, although the guy tried to stop him. The guy warned the boy that the flames of the paradox will not go out until the target dies. The monsters could no longer cause harm from a long distance, but they were still alive and it was dangerous to approach them closely. The young man understood that he would have to intervene in what was happening, otherwise the boy would die, and he immediately jumped up from the spot. The young man had to make several blows at the still living monsters. It was obvious that the child would not have been able to react in time and would have died at the clutches of the monsters. The young man arrived in time and managed to push the boy back. The young man noted that he didn't know what YouTube videos the boy was watching, but he definitely should have stopped watching them. The young man looked at the huge stick that the child was holding in his hands and asked if he could take this staff for himself. Taking the staff, the young man made a few more blows and finished off the monster. Another monster then rushed into the attack, jumping from somewhere above onto the guys. The young man watched the monster's movements closely. The attack was unexpected, but nevertheless the young man was not caught off guard. The young man delivered another deft blow and dealt with another monster. It took some more time to finish off the remaining weakened monsters. The young man's name is very good, although I wondered where he learned to fight like that. The boy was shocked, but at the same time he was completely delighted by how strong his new acquaintance turned out to be. The boy even suggested that his new acquaintance could probably be an undercover hunter. The young man didn't pay much attention to it and cursed himself silently for the fact that even after returning to Earth, he was forced to smell the stench of blood. The young man went through all the circles of hell, consoling himself with thoughts of a quiet life, and was disappointed that the Earth was now teeming with monsters and was not much different from the world from which he returned. All the residents of the house had already gathered in the shelter, and surprisingly they were doing quite calmly. Soon the young man and the child reached the shelter's doors, eager to finally reach safety. Entering the shelter and continuing the conversation with the boy, the young man expressed surprise that elementary school students were now being called little kids. The boy emphasized that this was a very offensive way to insult them. The boy's parents immediately noticed their son as soon as he descended into the shelter. The woman immediately called out his name. The woman ran up to her child and asked the young man if he had brought her son Yong-sung to the shelter, which made Yong-sung himself feel a bit ashamed. The young man looked at the woman while she was hugging her son and noticed that she had designer clothes and luxurious earrings, which indicated that their family was rich, and this explained a lot. Suddenly, everyone in the shelter shook with fear as they heard a loud knock on one of the walls. The entire shelter shook under the blows of a huge fist. In an instant, the wall collapsed and a huge monster appeared from behind the cover. The monster loudly closed its toothy mouth, its long tongue hanging out. Everyone in the shelter began to tell each other that the outer wall had been breached. Panic set in, but the young man resisted the general atmosphere and instead turned toward the danger. Ensign, seeing the young man's reaction, advised him to lie down with everyone else this time. The young man didn't react to the boy's words. He was deep in thought about how he had never asked for much in his life. The young man simply wanted to return to the world he once knew. He wanted to return to the home he missed so much. He didn't understand why this desire wasn't enough. The young man looked at his hand. The skin on his palm was raw and bleeding. Having come to his senses, the young man turned to Ensign, calling him a small fry, which immediately made him indignant. The young man asked why Yong-sun, being from a wealthy family, wanted to become a hunter when he could have simply hidden in some comfortable and safe place where he wouldn't have to fight. Yong-sun couldn't ignore the words he'd just heard. They had definitely struck a chord. After a brief pause, the boy told the young man that the monster had killed his father, and that was the reason he'd become a hunter. The ensign said that on that day a corrosive rift opened in the underground bunker and they thought it was safe. It was then that Ensign realized there was no safe place on Earth. Ensign noted that even though he was not so strong and the monsters were terrible, he still intended to become a hunter and get rid of all the corrosive rifts. Ensign simply squeaked out what he wanted in the post to the world, which greatly surprised the young man. Ensign directly stated that perhaps his words were a foolish dream, but the young man interrupted him, emphasizing that he would definitely become a good hunter. The young man tried to explain to Ensign that he simply would not be able to save the world no matter how good a hunter he became. Ensign's mother asked her son to stop this crazy dialogue and go to a safer place as soon as possible, but the boy began to resist. Ensign couldn't leave without finishing his sentence and without knowing the reasons why he couldn't save the world. Ensign broke free from his mother's embrace and moved towards the unfamiliar guy, wanting to hear some explanation. Ensign didn't expect to hear what he had to hear. The guy was going to confront the monster alone and shouted to Yongsun that he was going to save the world himself. Ensign was perplexed. It felt like something so important had been taken from him, and he couldn't even stand up for it. The young man smiled and explained that the work of saving the world was intended for those who had already done it. He was summoned to another world. He was forced to fight monsters for 20 years only to be returned to his home world afterward. Before he could fully enjoy his freedom, he was attacked by a monster from a corrosive rift. Fortunately, using the experience of his past life, he survived and promised one boy that he would save the world. He didn't know then that it would turn out to be a deception. In fact, as time passed, it turned out the young man had done nothing. The young man played computer games with complete enjoyment and simply enjoyed his ordinary life, closing his eyes to what was happening. The young man tried to enjoy ordinary things like winning a computer game and ate treats to wash it all down. He also enjoyed the drink in tin cans and tried to forget that the world was perishing due to a monster invasion. The young man also tried to forget his own words about how he who saved the world once could save it again. He said this confidently in front of a crowd of people, but his desire to save the world didn't last long. Games, abundant food, everything he could only dream of in that world, and a system where you could do anything with the click of a button. In addition, the young man thought that the hunters were supposed to save the world, but not him. Having finished playing, the young man decided that he should order something. But he suddenly discovered that he had spent his entire allowance. The original owner of this body, Yu Chang-suk, was an employee of a logistics company, but due to a corrosive fracture his company went bankrupt and he lost his job. Now that his severance pay had run out, things were difficult. He tried to find a new job but couldn't get a regular one. Due to the constant opening of corrosive fault lines, most of the company was going out of business, which was to be expected. To survive in modern society, a job was needed, but the young man couldn't think of anything to do. It seemed like companies weren't hiring new people. Chang-sik finally settled on a vacancy for a hunter. There was nowhere else to go, and the young man decided to stay with this job, since he definitely already had experience, and he went to the Hunters Association. The reception hall was very noisy. You could hear people rejoicing at the chance to become hunters. Two men were talking. One was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a hunter, but the other was trying to point out that the test he'd passed was merely a formality and meant nothing. New hunters were required to demonstrate a specific skill, and this was crucial. Most of the people who joined the Hunters Association were ordinary people who had no real skills. The men settled into their conversation, but suddenly her gaze fell on a pair of curly black hair that literally flew past them. A girl walked past with a very confident gait. The entire dialogue seemed to evaporate by itself. The girl attracted so much attention. Many people recognized this beautiful woman, and the hall became even noisier than before. The girl's name was Lee Seo-yun. She ranked 10th in the world rankings of hunters and was a partner hunter of the Yanabi Guild. No one in the hall even expected to meet this girl. Many had heard that she had gone to Chaewon to close the corrosive rift, and immediately there was a commotion about whether the Yanabi Guild had sent someone personally to scout the area, since Lee Seon was a member of the association. At the time, new candidates for the hunters were being considered. Lee Seon settled on Han Sang, a Hunter Academy graduate awakened with the power of electrokinesis. Lee Seon wondered out loud if this girl was a candidate to charge a phone, but the man sitting next to her emphasized that this girl was a candidate for a hunter and not an electricity generator. The man emphasized that they said the girl was quite skilled in handling her ability, which meant that she could be useful in the association. The dialogue was interrupted by a man who suddenly appeared out of nowhere and started speaking loudly, which frightened the others. Well, the man who arrived noted that this girl was an excellent student at the academy, and noted that there were many examples of how excellent students did not achieve good results in real combat, with which Lee Se-yun agreed, and gave her a candy as a sign of encouragement. Practice at the academy and real combat were two completely different things. Academy graduates who only trained in safe training found it difficult to withstand a real fight, and it was assumed that Han Sang-a needed a long time to adapt. Lee Se-yun paused briefly and noted that the team leader should have found out by now. But she also asked if it was really normal for her to be gone for a whole week. Lee Se-yun thought to herself that one way or another, the work that had been entrusted to her had to be completed, and said out loud that she really hoped that the candidate girl who had not been considered would make her believe in herself and be hired. The presenter adjusted his glasses and, having captured the audience's attention, noted that something interesting awaited them. The presenter noted that the next candidate was a civilian and did not even graduate from the hunting academy. Yahello prepared to go on stage and gripped his staff tighter. When the gates to the ring opened, the host wondered out loud how much courage the person entering the ring had. The host introduced a new candidate named Yu Chang-suk. The young man's face contorted. He still couldn't get used to his new body and name. The presenter noted that it was necessary to listen to the rules of the fight and explained that weapons other than those provided by the association were not allowed to be used, and it was also forbidden to strike blows that threatened health. Yu Chang-sik thought that since he had decided to become a hunter, he should first save the world that was doomed to fall. Looking around, Yu Chang-sik also thought that saving the world would also allow him to live and eat well. These thoughts gave him so much courage that no opponent was a threat to him. After examining his arrogant opponent, Yu Chang-suk decided he needed to achieve a very good result in the tournament. The host asked the participants to take their positions and announced the start of the tournament. The host of this tournament was also very interested in watching what was happening, even though it was dangerous. Yu Chang-suk's opponent charged in with a laugh. He laughed because he was so lucky that his opponent couldn't even gather Manu. Yu Chang-sik's opponent asked him to consider it an honor to lose to someone like him, but these words did not offend the young man at all. The young man, being Yu Chang-sik's rival, rushed to attack, shouting that he was the undefeated master of the Hunter Academy. Lee Se-yun watched the events in the ring with indifference. In fact, she didn't think that any of the candidates would be able to stand out in any particular way. One of the swords got stuck on the ring floor. The hall fell silent. Yu Chang-suk's opponent froze in bewilderment. While about to attack his opponent, he discovered that he had simply vanished. The guy's face distorted. At first he thought his opponent had simply fled, having withstood his onslaught. But suddenly he heard someone call him a cow on ice. Yu Chang-suk appeared suddenly and attacked from the side. The young man from the academy never expected such a move from his opponent, who was essentially an ordinary person and naturally suffered severe damage. The force of the blow was very great, and it was difficult to stay on your feet. Yu Chang-sik, the unstoppable one, struck his opponent with another blow from underneath straight to the chin. Yu Chang-sik's opponent instantly lost several of his front teeth and lost touch with reality from the powerful blow. Yu Chang-sik looked at his fist, then looked at his opponent, and was very surprised that their fight ended so quickly. Yu Chang-sik used only his hands, fearing serious injury if he used a spear, but his opponent appeared to be a novice, which was highly disconcerting. He didn't think they were average hunters. Lee Se-yun was simply shocked by what she saw in the ring. She immediately wondered who the guy was who had stepped in and won so quickly. Lee Se-yun immediately looked at Yu Chang-suk's profile and was even more shocked to see that he had previously worked for a logistics company. Another judge saw that the candidate had practically no mana in his body and was capable of such a thing. The man assumed that in order to have only strength, the guy would have to collect mana for quite a long time, and since this was not the case, he leaned towards the fact that the guys were most likely just lucky. The man found another piece of candy in his hands. He quickly realized that Lee Se-yun simply wanted him to shut up and not disturb her while she watched the fight. Lee Se-yun began watching the ring more closely, not emphasizing that the candidate hadn't intentionally picked Manu. She was 100% certain of it. Yu Chang-sik, having lost his neck a little, noted that he felt a little awkward, but he was obliged to finish the fight with a confident victory to prove his abilities. Yu Changsik's opponent, without rising to his knees and holding his battered chin, tried to figure out how the guy managed to perform such a blow. Yu Changsik rushed into the attack again, warning his opponent not to be afraid because everything would happen very quickly. The academy graduate barely managed to cover his face with his hands. He was terrified that he would have to endure such humiliation again. A moment later, the academy graduate was already lying unconscious, having lost another tooth. The host announced candidate Yu Changsuk as the winner. Many viewers looked at each other in surprise but clapped. Lee Seon was very interested in the candidate. She knew she had to hire him. The men didn't even have time to notice how Lee Se-yun simply disappeared from her previous place. The girl was thinking about how she should have made her exit while the others were still evaluating this candidate. She wanted to see his true skills. When the girl was asked where she was going, she replied that she would like to see the president of the association. While defeating his new opponents, Yu Changsik was very surprised that they were so weak even for newbies who had just become hunters. Yu Changsik thought that no matter how many matches he played, his opponents were approximately the same level. Yu Changsik didn't understand what they taught at the Hunter Academy at all if its graduates were so worthless. Yu Changsik even managed to get upset when he didn't find a worthy opponent and thought that he would never be able to meet one at this competition. Soon Yu Changsik noticed the silver hair of his new rival. Many in the hall began to make noise at the sight of their favorite candidate and were glad that they would finally see her with their own eyes. The host announced that Han Sang-ah would be performing in the finals and asked the audience if this girl would finally be able to interrupt the victory march of their mysterious super rookie. Yu Changsik became interested in his new rival and thought that at least out of all the people he had seen, she had at least collected more mana than the others. Han Sang-ah was unfazed until she saw her opponent, and then her face twisted slightly. She thought her opponent was some kind of upstart and was confident she could quickly defeat him. Han Sang-ah noted that Yu Changsik had nothing and perhaps he was just lucky to reach the finals, after which she emphasized that this was where his luck ended. Yu Changsik asked if they taught hunters to speak according to a manual at the academy, to which his rival, drawing her sword, merely emphasized that it was obvious he didn't have a unique skill since he was punching everyone. Lightning and sparks began to flash around the girl's body. She looked into her opponent's eyes and decided that she would never give in to him. Yu Changsik went over the consequences of using his special unique skill in his head and was once again convinced that he didn't really want to use it against people in the tournament. Yu Changsik looked at her opponent and thought that he was proving this to her, that he definitely wouldn't do it and would fight her with his fists. The host asked the candidates to get ready, and soon the tournament began, which Han Sang-ah was looking forward to. As soon as the host announced the start of the tournament, Han Sang-ah pulled out her sword with a bang that was accompanied by sparks. Yu Changsik looked closely at the abilities his rival possessed and was very surprised. The girl instantly leaped forward and rushed into the attack. Every movement she made was accompanied by a shower of sparks and lightning. There was very little time left before the girl was supposed to deliver a punch. She was very surprised at how quickly the situation in the ring changed. She didn't expect her opponent to be able to dodge her attack, but Yu Changsik didn't just jump to the side, he jumped high into the air and flipped over in the air, dodging the attack. Han Sang-ah was simply amazed that her opponent was able to dodge the lightning with just one jump and was not affected at all. Yu Changsik found his opponent's attack very interesting as she passed an electric current through the sheath and blade, making them magnetic, and then added magnetic force while pulling the blade out, turning it into a railgun. Having fallen to the ground, Yu Changsik addressed his opponent, noting that her skills were better so far but emphasized that she was missing the most important thing. Han Sang-ah immediately became interested and asked what her opponent meant, to which he immediately explained that she was thinking about an attack and was focused only on attacking. Yu Changsik quickly noticed that his opponent's mistake was that she had laid magnetic rails in empty space to make the blade draw even faster. Yu Changsik said that it didn't matter how fast or strong the attack was because only an idiot could carry out an attack with such an obvious trajectory, and smiled widely, looking his opponent straight in the eyes. Han Sang-ah got angry when she heard such words from her rival and asked him not to get cocky ahead of time. The girl again rushed into the attack, saying that she had defeated people like him without using this technique. Yu Changsik ran towards his opponent and called her a fool, noting that he had dodged her fastest attack and would dodge all the following ones. Han Sang-ah was confident that she would succeed and prepared to attack with greater force. Having carried out the attack, the girl again discovered that her opponent had dodged and was not affected at all. Yu Changsik understood perfectly well that his opponent was overexerting herself and scraping off all her mana, completely exhausting herself. Yu Changsik understood that if Han Sang-a continued in the same spirit, her body would soon not be able to withstand it. Choosing the right moment, Yu Changsik jumped up to Han Sang-a and, noting that their fight was very cool, suggested that they stop there, which left the girl perplexed. Yu Changsik took advantage of her confusion and, smiling, asked the girl to raise her left hand if it hurt. Having warned that it might hurt, he struck her in the stomach and threw the girl up, which she certainly did not expect. When Han Sang-a realized that she had made a stupid mistake, it was already too late. The girl looked at her fist-wielding opponent. She realized she had been foolishly outwitted. Yu Changsik understood that one blow would not be enough and prepared to strike again. The young man swung his arm wide and gathered strength into his hand. Without sparing his opponent, Yu Changsik hit her with renewed force. Han Sang-a lost consciousness because the blow was too strong. She knew she had lost this fight. The girl fell into the winter and never rose again. Her sword fell not far from her. All the judges were simply amazed. They couldn't believe that a rookie candidate could surpass Han Sang-a, the academy's top student. Yu Changsik, shaking the dust off his clothes, noted to himself that his opponent was definitely more skilled than the others, but before this, she most likely relied on Manhwa and abandoned physical exercise. Surprisingly, the fight wasn't over. Yu Changsik heard rustling sounds behind him and was surprised that Han Sang-a had recovered so quickly and was ready to continue. Han Sang-a didn't want to admit that she lost, but she raised her hand. The presenter approached the girl, who was still lying on the ground and trembling, continuing to hold her hand raised. Yu Changsik immediately remembered his words. He had asked his opponent to raise her left hand if she felt any pain, and now she had raised it. A man entered the ring and approached the host while Yu Changsik stood nearby. The leading scientist was told something and he could not hide his surprise. As soon as the man left the ring, the host immediately asked for attention and announced that the tournament schedule had been changed. The host noted that the winner, Yu Changsik, was asked to take a short break, to which he was indignant, noting that this was supposed to be the last fight. The host noted that very soon the winner, Yu Changsik, and the current hunter would have a special match, which surprised everyone. The host explained that this match was being held with special permission from the association president and asked the audience to show their enthusiasm. The hunters who had come with Lee Se-yun realized where their friend had gone. Yu Changsik looked around and discovered that the opponent had already been announced on the monitor, which was only visible to the spectators, and judging by their reactions, he was facing a rather skilled hunter. Yu Changsik thought about the changes in the tournament and wondered if it was the huntress herself who would come out to test his abilities, assuming that some things were the same in both that world and this one. Changsuk entered the ring. She was armed with a huge sword which dragged the class along the floor. The girl, meeting the newcomer's gaze, apologized to him for showing up without warning, noting that it seemed no one else but her could test his skills. Lee Se-yun introduced herself and said that she was from the Yanabai Guild. Lee Se-yun smiled and noted that it seemed like this tournament had been too small for Yu Changsik so far and asked what he thought about fighting her. The girl warned Yu Changsik that he might refuse, and she would understand given the suddenness of the situation. Yu Changsik smiled as he saw Lee Se-yun, who was ranked 10th in the World Hunter rankings, standing before him. Yu Changsik noted the calm and aura emanating from Lee Se-yun's body. This wasn't a bluff, she was truly a professional. Yu Changsik estimated that with his current body he would have trouble even if he took up a spear. Yu Changsik even understands that he might lose, but he wasn't going to refuse this fight. Yu Changsik agreed to the fight and indicated he was ready to begin. The host was very surprised that they wanted to start the match right then and there. Yu Changsik glanced at his rival and noted that he was a little tired, but not tired enough to refuse. Lee Se-yun smiled back, noting that he seemed enthusiastic. Yu Changsik thought that if he had to fight Lee Se-yun anyway, it would be for the best, since he would be able to get a better result in the tournament. Yu Changsik thought that Lee Se-yun was the perfect opponent for his victory that was about to happen, although he was a little worried. Having shown his readiness to engage in battle, Yu Changsik took a spear and took a couple of steps towards his opponent, noting that he wanted to see if he could increase his value. The hunters present at the podium were very surprised to see Lee Se-yun, who came out to personally check the rookie candidates. The host made the most of the tension and excitement that had built up among the audience. But he was no less excited than his audience. When the fight began, Lee Se-yun was no less surprised. She was amazed that the newcomer had the same skills. Yu Changsik tried his best. He gave it his all and understood how important it was to win this fight. Well, very soon the young man realized what he had gotten himself into and was surprised where so much strength came from in a woman's body which at first glance was so fragile. Lee Xian was ranked among the top 10 hunters. Her skills were astounding. Her strength made everyone tremble with fear. Yu Changsik managed to dodge his opponent's attacks and at some points even counter them. At some point Lee Xian realized that her speed had significantly decreased compared to the beginning of the battle. Yu Changsik, already out of breath, cursed. He thought it was impossible to say that his opponent had never given him an opening, but he was surprised that her body wasn't developed enough to take advantage of her mistakes. Lee Xian grinned, noting that she'd been hoping for a good warm-up in a long time and was disappointed that her opponent was already exhausted. She still noted that he fought well and thought he'd last 5 minutes, but he managed to last a full half hour. It was immediately clear the huntress had no intention of stopping. She pushed off and ran forward. Swinging her sword over her head, the huntress noted that she would now try to finish off the young man as gently as possible. Yu Changsik sensibly assessed his strength, realizing that he had almost no mana left and there was practically none in the atmosphere either. Yu Changsik was in a bad position and already assumed that he could lose, although this was not part of his plans. He had no choice but to use the Flame of Paradox, although he did not want to do this at all. Yu Changsik understood that he would have to stand to the end by any means possible. Lee Xian had no intention of pitying her rival. She had to show him what he should strive for in the future. The huntress struck. Her sword struck the ground, shattering the floor. The resulting shockwave sent Yu Changsik flying. Yu Changsik managed to land safely on the ground. He was still holding on. The huntress was sure that she had definitely hit. So her opponent could not dodge in any way, but he looked as if he had not received any damage. The huntress looked at her novice opponent and suddenly noticed that some black tongues of flame began to form around him, and his clothes began to smolder right on his body. The black flame began to engulf him completely, and the huntress immediately realized that it was the Flame of Paradox. Changsik's special skill that he used constantly before returning to Earth, and trusted this power the most. As could be seen from the undamaged clothing, unlike ordinary flames, the black flame did not ignite matter. Instead, each flame burned, consuming the abstract concepts he designated as fuel. In his new body, he lacked the mana bandwidth to burn difficult-to-ignite concepts like personality, memory, or reason. In his new incarnation, Yu Changsik had something else to burn. Wasting no time, he picked up speed and charged straight at the huntress. Lee Xian was very surprised that her opponent became even faster than he was before. Yu Changsik began to burn off his fatigue, giving him a huge advantage in the fight with the huntress. Lee Xian was very surprised that the newcomer had only had such a short break, and now he had become even stronger than before. Now the huntress had to defend herself because Yu Changsik attacked again and again. The huntress couldn't figure out what was happening. She felt her mana concentration fluctuate between low and high. The arena settings didn't change. Just as the flame emitted heat when it burned matter, so too did the Flame of Paradox emitted heat from Manhwa when it burned abstract concepts. Yu Changsik used mana to burn away the Paradox Flame, and the Paradox Flame in turn burned away his fatigue, generating more mana. It was an endless cycle that gave Yu Changsik a great advantage in combat against most opponents. Changsik's fighting style was very unique and could mislead many opponents, just like Lee Se-yun. The huntress didn't want to give up and was still trying to solve her opponent's riddle without causing him so much damage that he would finally calm down. But with each new blow, the huntress realized that her opponent was apparently not getting tired and even decided to ask if he was going to continue. Yu Changsik thought that he should have grabbed onto his opponent like a tick and not let go. The young man wanted this to be a war of attrition, and smiling answered the huntress that he could continue further. Deciding to play a joke, Yu Changsik asked the huntress if I liked guys who didn't know when to stop. Lee Se-yun growled in anger and emphasized that she hated such guys. If you set fire to wood, all that remained was ashes. Once burned, the ashes could not be rekindled. Similarly, the Flame of Paradox left behind a residue, and only if the entire flame was consumed, leaving only ashes, could the Flame of Paradox be extinguished. At some point, the huntress checked her watch and said that their fight with her son had already lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. Lee Xian noted that the newcomer lasted quite a long time and asked if he wanted to continue, but Yu Changsik, lying on the floor, begged for mercy. The host announced that the candidate had conceded defeat and the victor in this battle was the huntress Lee Se-yun. After announcing her victory, the girl pulled a large lollipop from her bosom. The hunters she came with were a little outraged that the girl took out the lollipop again. The huntress tossed a lollipop to Lee Se-yun, noting that it was for his efforts and explaining that she had put her business card inside. Yu Chang-sik took the business card in his hands and learned from it that Lee Se-yun was the hunter partner of the 3rd Yanabai team. Lee Se-yun emphasized that they would talk about the details later and asked him to just call her. The host announced that the hunter qualifying trial tournament was now complete, and turning to the winner, Yu Chang-sik asked him to come on stage and receive his reward. As soon as the opportunity arose, Yu Chang-sik immediately grabbed the lollipop, which turned out to be very tasty. Yu Chang-sik was scrolling through his phone and was very surprised that there was a hunting license on his smartphone, and noted how technology has developed, because in his time they would have just given him a piece of paper. After scrolling through his phone, the young man learned that there was a community of hunters, a used gear store selling monster body parts, alerting hunters in emergency situations, sending messages and calls via military satellite, and a whole bunch of other stuff. A huge man approached Yu Chang-sik, called him by name, and remarked that he looked much better in real life than on camera. Yu Chang-sik estimated that this man was very tall and must have been even more than 2 meters tall, and reached out his hand for the business card that was offered to him. From the business card, Yu Chang-sik learned that this big guy's name was Song-hyun. He was a hunter from the Taebeek Guild, which the hunter himself soon said, and noted that he wanted to be brief and asked to join his guild, or rather his team. Sung-hyun tried to assure Yu Chang-sik that he would shine as he gained experience in his team, and Chang-sik noted to himself that it didn't seem like the guy was lying. Yu Chang-sik also remembered that Lee Se-yun herself asked him to call. Chang-sik thought about the fact that he already had a preliminary agreement and he couldn't give this guy a clear answer, and noted that he needed to think a little before making a final decision. Song-hyun laughed, noting that he didn't want to be given an answer right here and now, and that he understood everything perfectly well anyway. But that wasn't all the big man wanted to say. Before leaving, he placed his huge hand on Yu Chang-suk's shoulder. Sung-hyun smiled and whispered to Yu Chang-sik that he should think carefully about this proposal. Chang-sik on the shoulder, Sung-hyun left. Yu Chang-sik immediately thought that she would definitely not go to Taebeek. Very quickly, Yu Chang-sik made a decision, called the hunter. Lee Se-yun introduced himself and asked where he could go to talk. The hunter said she was in a cabin on the 2nd floor of the Hunters Association building. Noting she would send the address, the hunter said she would wait. Yu Chang-sik didn't immediately understand which hut the huntress was talking about until he saw the sign with his own eyes. At the entrance, he was met by a nice girl who welcomed him into the hut. Lee Se-yun peeked out from behind one of the tables and smiled as Yu Chang-sik quickly invited him to sit down. As he walked towards the huntress's table, Yu Chang-sik noted that it was a very unusual name for a cafe. The huntress immediately saw that Chang-sik was a little confused and asked what had happened, and then told him that some very tall guy, Yoon Song-hyun, had tried to recruit him into another guild. Lee Se-yun smiled and noted that since Song-hyun himself had shown interest in the newcomer, the other guilds would not have dared to make their own offers. Yu Chang-sik looked into the girl's eyes and asked if this meant that Yanabe was also withdrawing her offer. The disgruntled huntress chuckled and, crossing out the ice cream with a spoon, noted that I had not planned to recruit him, which surprised Chang-sik himself. The huntress asked him what he thought about working for the guild without joining it, sort of like being self-employed. Yu Chang-sik was very surprised that he wasn't offered membership and wouldn't even become one. The huntress noted that Yoon Sung-hyun most likely offered the position of junior, which raised questions in Chang-suk. Chang-suk asked who the juniors were and what partner hunter meant. Lee Se-yun remembered that Chang-suk hadn't attended the Hunter Academy. The huntress explained that usually hunters in the guild had 3 ranks: junior, senior, and partner. The younger and older ones were part of teams led by partners, and this could be considered their regular paid jobs. Partner hunters received shares in the guild instead of a salary, and they shared the guild's net profits among themselves. Chanseok noted that it looked a lot like a law firm, to which the huntress agreed, and said that she heard that the first hunters who created the guild were targeting law firms. The huntress emphasized that to become a partner hunter, it was not necessary to go through the junior and senior stages or even join a guild. Yu Chang-sik replied that he seemed to understand, and concluded that if he became famous and achieved significant success, they themselves would start looking for him. The huntress was very pleased that she had been understood and gave him a candy. Chang-sik was a little confused, not understanding what the gesture meant. Opening the candy, Chanseok noted that he had neither experience nor connections, and therefore finding decent orders would be difficult. The huntress grinned and noted that she could help with this and would not even take a penny. Chanseok admitted that he couldn't understand why she did so much for him. The huntress explained that in the future, when he gained enough reputation to join a guild, she would like him to think that there was a great guild like Yanabai. Changsik noted that, in other words, he was simply being put on loan. Instead of answering, the girl placed an envelope on the table and asked if Changsik wanted to see what was inside, noting that the choice was his. Changsik reached for the envelope asking what it was, and the huntress explained that it was a commission from the Incheon City administration. A corrosive zone had formed on Gyeongdong Island 2 years ago after a failed attempt to destroy a corrosive fault. Changsik asked if it was the beginning of what he should do to go there and close that rift. The huntress said that his task was to patrol the island, and if additional corrosive rifts appeared, to get rid of them. Changsik glanced at the contract and found out that the start was in a month, and they were offering 5 million won as a deposit and 15 million in case of success. Changsik thought about it a bit and noted that given that this zone was life-threatening, the plata was not that big. The huntress laughed and noted that if he considered the payment unfair, he should have become stronger and more famous, and then he wouldn't just rake in the money, but there would be nowhere to rake it in. The huntress looked at Changsik, who looked very serious, and demanded his answer. Changsik was able to make a quick decision and immediately notified the huntress. After meeting the newcomer, the huntress went by car to do other things, and on the way she called someone who immediately demanded to know about the newcomer. The huntress revealed that Changsik was a civilian and had won the tournament using bare hands, which left the person on the other end of the line amazed. The huntress also emphasized that the guy practically did not open up and lasted a whole 4 hours against her. The man was surprised and asked if this was because she was holding back, but the huntress assured the boss that she was a veteran with 10 years of experience, and that this could not have happened. The girl emphasized that her entire experience was built on survival in hellish conditions, and that she would have torn anyone else to pieces like a dog would a hot water bottle, but she fought with him for 4 hours. The huntress doubted that she could see someone like that even in the next life. During this conversation, passengers were disembarking on the island. While people were disembarking from the boats onto the island, the boss warned the huntress that no matter how much she valued the newcomer, she had to keep in mind that the island only required hunters with experience in completing missions. The boss emphasized that the newcomer's skills might be excellent, but there were doubts whether he could demonstrate anything worthy against teams of experienced hunters. The huntress asked the boss not to worry, assuring her that she was confident in her candidate. Lee Sean explained that she had paired the newcomer with someone reliable, and the boss agreed with her, noting that she was the brains behind all the guild's operations and he trusted her. Finally, the boss asked the huntress what kind of guy this guy could become when he reached her level, to which the girl replied that, in her opinion, when this guy reached her level, he would be able to handle her boss. Changsik himself didn't know how many emotions he evoked in people who heard about him. Well, at that moment, he was only interested in completing the task. He understood perfectly well that his entire future depended on this task. A month before these events, Changsik was living a normal life at sea, awaiting his delivery. The courier lugging his load prayed to see the apartment he needed sooner. The courier didn't understand anything at all. It was hard for him to imagine that there could just be bricks there. The man was very happy to quickly deliver all the deliveries and be free. Soon the courier found the right delivery and was relieved of the last load with great joy. Changsik received his package. He realized how long it must have taken the courier to drag this box upstairs. Changsik wanted to open this case as quickly as possible and see what was inside. One by one, the guy removed all the latches, and now the lid could be lifted. Changsik was simply delighted to see what he ordered with his own eyes. Now Changsik had a normal spear that couldn't break from the first obstacle it came across. Changsik took out an elixir from the box, which was a potion used by hunters in emergency situations, and which contained condensed mana, which was very helpful in situations when mana was urgently needed. This potion was a typical method of mana manipulation similar to drinking filtered water. By controlling the mana in the air, it was stored within the body and used as needed. This same elixir allowed for the same effect, but in a much shorter time. Changsik used mana in a slightly different way, skipping the storage process and directly absorbing mana from the atmosphere while using it. The advantage of this method was that there were no limitations since it used the mana contained in the air. In addition, during the process of absorbing and releasing mana, the mana channels through which mana flowed were significantly strengthened, which allowed even more mana to be used. The only drawback to this method was that until mana channels were developed, Changsik Fly could only operate with a small amount, which prevented him from allocating more mana at once. Changsik decided that he didn't have time and should stock up on mana before using it. He thought in advance that if he trains using this elixir at least once a month, he will be able to restore the necessary part of his strength. Soon enough time passed, and Changsik went to Gyeongdong Island in Incheon. A huge line formed at the checkpoint. everyone had to sign in. Each person in line held out their smartphone, which had a personal QR code that the security scanned. When Changsik handed over his QR code, his identity was confirmed and he was enrolled in the 8th squad, which he was informed about. Changsik Bruza was not thinking about anything other people. He heard others' conversations and even guessed what they might be thinking about. Suddenly Changsik heard his name and raised his head in search of the person who had addressed him. In front of him Changsik saw Han Sang-ah and noted that her hair had finally settled down, to which the girl noted that this was her normal hairstyle, and at their first meeting her hair was under static electricity. Han Sang-ah, approaching him closer, noted that she was glad that they were in the same squad and offered to work together with him during the mission, to which he asked why he would agree. Han Sang-ah explained that he was stronger than her and that she could learn something from watching him. Changsik laughed, noting that he'd soon fall over from such compliments. For some reason Han Sang-ah thought that Changsik was dizzy, and noted that this could be very distracting in a fight, which could be very dangerous, and he should see a doctor, which made him think that it could have been understood even during their match that she completely lacked a sense of humor. Soon everyone heard the voice of one of the men asking everyone to calm down and pay more attention. The man noted that came into number 8 had gathered in full force and they could finally begin the briefing. The man noted that since there were newcomers among them who were performing the task for the first time, he would explain the terminology, and asked for forgiveness and understanding from the other participants, which put Changsik in an awkward position since all of this was because of him. The man noted that corrosive faults were divided into classes 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and no classes, and the closer to the first class, the more dangerous the rupture was. In addition, the first rupture in the area was assigned the special designation Alpha. The Alpha Rift was on the island and located in a church in the northern part of Insari. And although it was a corrosive rift without class, considering that corrosive rifts became increasingly dangerous over time, she politely asked him to refrain from approaching him. The man noted that the purpose was to patrol Epna-ri and Kadando men, as well as the detection and in this case destruction of newly formed ruptures. One of the team members was outraged that this destruction mission was for a team with a newcomer. Soon another boat arrived at its destination in the required area of the island. Changsik sensed the tension in the other participants. Everyone was afraid something Changsik himself couldn't understand, and he couldn't understand why everyone was being so dramatic. Han Sang-ah did not walk far from Changsik and walked with him behind the rest of the group. A whistle was heard, which was a signal. Everyone was told that the situation on the island was reported to the shore from the control room, and if help was needed, they needed to contact it. The hunters were wished good luck, and the team began to formulate a plan for their work. The team discussed how they needed to scout 2 areas in a week and how to do it efficiently. Chanseok didn't want to be left out and decided to immediately propose her own course of action, to which the team responded very well. Changsik suggested setting up a camp at the Wajisa temple and operating from there, and showed where it was located on the map. Some team members noted that they had never heard of this newcomer, while others began to ask why it was necessary to go to the temple. Changsik explained that the temple overlooked one area while the summit overlooked another. The old temple building was still there and they could store their things there. Changsik emphasized that this was obvious. The team began to complain that there were plenty of places to park nearby, and they could be surrounded while they were climbing the mountain for some unknown reason, but Chanseok noted that he had not seen the enemy running in thousands and asked who was supposed to surround them. The team still stood their ground. No one wanted to follow anyone's orders, especially not those of an incompetent rookie. Changsik only considered idiots who defied logic and concluded that such people existed in all worlds. Then Changsik was offered to act independently, to which he immediately agreed and began to carry out his plan. Meanwhile, the other part of the team decided to act as they wanted without listening to the newcomer. The team split into 2 groups. Chanseok wasn't very happy about this, but he had nowhere else to go. Changsik thought about how he expected only Han Sang-ah to follow him. There was another guy next to him whose mother was even somewhat superior to the electric girl. Chanseok asked if the guy's name was Kim Min-jae, and immediately asked why he was following him. Kim Min-jae noted that he was afraid to let the newcomers go free, and Changsik, with a grin, thanked him for his concern, thinking that at least one person was worthy on this island. Chang-sik suddenly saw something in front of him that was slightly hindering their progress. The entire group had to brake sharply. Chang-sik asked everyone to stop and not make any unnecessary movements. Chang-sik asked the team to carefully look at the opposite edge. Kim Min-jae listened to the advice and carefully peered out from behind the rock in the right direction. There was a huge crowd of monsters ahead who were looking for something. Kim Min-jae noted that they could have bypassed these monsters because there were too many of them, at least 50. Chang-sik asked the guy to calm down and asked what his unique skill was, but Kim Min-jae immediately became indignant that a newbie would even think of fighting these monsters. Chang-sik noted that the task of each hunter was to kill the mind creature and asked to name the unique skill. Kim Min-jae replied that his unique skill was flame, after which Chang-sik asked which technique he was most confident in, and it turned out to be fireball. Chang-sik, having heard what he needed, emphasized that Kim Min-jae was supposed to attack the monsters on his signal, which made him perplexed. Han Sang-ah, without further questioning, simply asked what she needed to do, which further surprised Kim Min-jae, who had hoped that at least the girl would bring the newcomer to his senses. Kim Min-jae tried to explain to the two that attacking 50 enemies with just 3 of them was madness, and besides it was also the first task. Kim Min-jae began to say that they should have told the other hunters about the danger, to which Chang-sik noted that they would not have been able to arrive in time anyway. Chang-sik pointed out that unlike the 3 of them who came directly from Wajisa Temple, the rest of the hunters were scattered along the coast. Calling the hunters for help was pointless, since there was no guarantee that the hunters who heard their call on the radio would arrive in time. But if these hunters scattered while the rest of the hunters were waiting, they could become a threat to the others. Kim Min-jae silently agreed that the newcomer was right. Kim Min-jae understood that even if a hunter were to suddenly appear nearby, they would most likely not come to the rescue due to the recent conflict. Chang-sik noted that everything listed above initially only meant that they needed to deal with the goblins themselves, and in such an unpleasant situation they needed to strike suddenly. Chang-sik traced a plan of action on the ground with the tip of his sword. He noted that there was no time and he would explain everything briefly. He also noted that Hunter Min-jae was to attack the goblin center first with a fireball, while he himself would block their flanks. Han Sang-ah also received her assignment. Kim Min-jae was focused on the rookie's well-thought-out strategy and the feeling that the rookie had extensive combat experience. Well, there was no point in wondering who the newcomer really was, and it was necessary to begin the attack on the goblins. Kim Min-jae, as previously agreed, attacked first, releasing a fireball into the crowd of monsters. Then Chang-sik appeared, blocked the flank, and did not allow the monsters to escape. Everything around was ablaze. It was very difficult to see anything. Kim Min-jae yelled that he needed time before he could throw another fireball, and Chang-sik asked him to throw the next one as soon as he could. Kim Min-jae noted that he would do everything possible and as soon as possible. Chang-sik rushed around the battlefield, understanding that in battle his priority was efficiency. To achieve maximum efficiency, a division into roles was necessary. Chang-sik perfectly identified the abilities of each member of his small team and knew in advance who would be useful where in the fight against the goblins. While Min-jae was not ready to throw the fireball, Chang-sik was busy keeping the goblins away from Min-jae. It was clear that Chang-sik could not block the movement of all the goblins, at least because there were too many of them. Hunter Yu Chang-sik tried to stop as many goblins as possible. It is for this reason that sharing goals was very important in teamwork. At that very moment, Han Sang-ah also entered the battle. Having pulled out her sword, the girl rushed to attack the goblins. Lightning swirled around the girl again. Minji's voice was heard indicating that he was ready to release the next fireball. Chang-sik promised that he could dodge the fireball and it was worth launching it. Kim Min-jae launched another fireball that seemed to be even slightly larger than the previous one. A powerful explosion occurred on the battlefield, causing the entire forest to shake. Chang-sik to do was to finish off some of the surviving goblins. Chang-sik alerted his team members that it was time to engage in hand-to-hand combat. Despite the fact that the flames and smoke made it difficult to see what was happening on the battlefield, the team was already very close to the target. Soon all the goblins were defeated. Chang-sik thrust the blade of his spear into the ground and sighed. Chang-sik looked around and remained silent, waiting for the others to approach him. Hearing from behind her, Chang-sik praised her team members for doing a very good job. The most interesting thing was that Kim Min-jae didn't come seeking gratitude or praise. He was holding a weapon in his hands, which he pointed at Chang-sik. For Chang-sik to encounter such a situation within his team, he assumed that another man from the hunters went with him for a reason, but he never thought that he would be so hostile. Well, everything turned out to be exactly the opposite. Kim Min-jae smiled and asked Chang-sik to step aside. Chang-sik silently protested because he was absolutely certain he was about to be shot. Kim Min-jae still fired a couple of bullets, but they hit one surviving goblin. Turned out it wasn't a gun at all. The hunter inserted a microchip into the goblin's body, explaining that after the mission was completed and the area was deemed safe, the scavengers he had a contract with would come and collect the bodies. Chanseok asked again which scavengers he was talking about, to which the hunter replied that it would be difficult for them to dismember the body into useful offal since these creatures were heavy. The hunter said that in other words he marked the body's chip, and when the task was completed scavengers came and collected everything of value. After collecting the bodies, the scavengers would evaluate the loot and sell it. Naturally they would take a certain commission, but other than that the money would go to the hunter who had injected the chips. Chanseok asked again whether these garbage collectors could be trusted, to which the hunter replied that it was important to find good garbage collectors and sign a contract with them. Kim Min-jae emphasized that in any case Chang-sik was amazing and admitted that he would never have thought that the three of them could handle 50 monsters. This heart-to-heart conversation made the hunters lose their vigilance, and they did not notice how their main enemy was hiding among the trees. A huge goblin, who was most likely the leader, attacked the hunters. The boys fell to the floor as the powerful monster's blows caused the ground to shake and knocked the boys off their feet. All hunters had to quickly regather all their resources and get ready for the buoy. This time the enemy was very dangerous, and the three of us had to try hard to defeat him. Chanseok, looking closely at the monster, noted that it looked like some kind of boss. In fact, that's exactly what happened. This monster was very powerful and controlled other small goblins. Chang-sik cursed out loud, being very unhappy with the situation they found themselves in. Chang-sik realized they had now met the leader of the creatures they had recently killed. They looked like the same species. Chang-sik emphasized to himself that the amount of mana I was emitting from him was nothing compared to the mana of those small fish. Nevertheless, Chang-sik decided to deal with him himself and asked the others not to interfere. Chang-sik thought that if this monster leader came for the three of them, there was no way those two could escape, even though they really wanted to participate in the fight, and tried to convince Chang-sik to change his mind. Chang-sik yelled that they needed to stop chatting and get away from the battlefield quickly if they wanted to go home in a body bag. Kim Min-jae and Han Sang-ah froze for a moment, not expecting to be shouted at and forced to run away. Chang-sik decided that it would be much better for him to handle everything alone, so that he could use the paradox flame without fear of hurting any of his people and perhaps end the fight quickly. As the hunters disappeared from the battlefield, Chang-sik shouted to the monsters to attack. The hunters, having listened to the advice to leave, ran a long distance away from what was happening. However, the hunters continued to doubt whether they had done the right thing and thought that perhaps they should have stayed and helped the newcomer who might have had problems. Han Sang-ah, unlike Kim Min-jae, was confident that they had done the right thing by giving the newcomer the opportunity to be alone. The girl noted that although the newbie appeared to be putting pressure on her, he had never missed a single blow and should have been able to handle even such a monster. Han Sang-ah remembered their first fight very well and knew what this man was capable of. Han Sang-ah could barely dodge his attacks despite her impressive fighting skills. She was confident the newcomer could handle such a monster and everything would be fine. She knew that Chanseok was not just dodging this window and immediately attacking himself. Moreover, with each strike of his spear, black lights appeared that she had never heard of before. The girl remembered that the more lights appeared, the slower the monster became. At first it looked like Chanseok was at a disadvantage, but with the monster it felt like he was playing with it like a cat with a mouse. Han Sang-ah doubted that the newcomer was really a newcomer like her. His skills were far superior to her own, and she couldn't understand how this was possible. Chang-sik was indeed very strong on the battlefield. If he were to fight such a strong monster, most hunters would run away from him. Chang-sik felt confident and was glad that he was independent in this battle. He was also glad that he had finally decided to order something very good for himself, which was now helping him. At what moment did Chang-sik throw his spear high into the sky? Han Sang-ah saw what the newcomer did and immediately understood what it could mean. The girls felt like the spear would land back and definitely harm Chang-sik himself. Kim Min-jae was also very surprised that the newcomer threw his savings aside. The hunters asked him to be careful, worried that he might not be able to cope with the attack of the goblin leader. The monster was literally a few centimeters from Chang-sik's face, but for some reason it suddenly stopped. The monster suddenly fell to the ground and tongues of black flame began to disperse around it. The spear that Changsik threw up fell straight on the goblin leader and pierced his head. Changsik approached and examined the monster, becoming surprised at how this monster could move even after he had burned all of its power. After thinking for a bit, Changsik decided to make a few more control blows to make sure that the monster would not get up again. Kim Min-jae and Han Sang-ah were simply shocked by what they saw. Kim Min-jae thought it was impossible for a rookie to behave like this. The hunter clearly saw the monster pressing against Changsik. It could have ended badly, but now the monster was defeated. Changsik interrupted the hunter's thoughts and called him over. Changsik asked the hunter if monsters like this brute were common on the island. Kim Min-jae replied that he'd also like to know, since for a creature that wasn't even the core of a corrosive rift, such a thing would only be possible if it had survived a rift of at least the 3rd class. The corrosive rifts were divided into 4 classes. Changsik clearly remembers that during the briefing they said that the alpha corrosive rift on the island had no class. Chansok pointed out that in that case it meant that the alpha corroding rift on the island had grown to class 3, which surprised the other 2 hunters. Han Sang-ah wanted to remind her that they had said something different at the briefing, but Changsik asked the girl to think for herself, asking how else the manifestation of such a powerful monster could be explained. Kim Min-jae noted that the difference between the corrosive rifts of no class and the 3rd class were like heaven and earth. The hunter noted that if this were true, then the number of hunters who could return alive tended to 0. Kim Min-jae panicked and turned to Changsik, noting that they should immediately rescue the remaining hunters. Changsik asked how he could single-handedly save all the hunters scattered across the island. He emphasized that he had his limits, and if he couldn't do something he'd say so right away. Chansok noted that their task was not to rescue the hunters in trouble, but to detect and destroy new corrosive faults, and besides, in such a job it was foolish to expect that everyone would return home. Han Sang-ah decided to take an interest and asked Changsik what would happen if he himself found himself in such a situation. The girl asked if he wouldn't consider it unfair, wouldn't feel offended, and wouldn't ask for rescue. Han Sang-ah was outraged by the newcomer's behavior and believed they should have rushed to the Steel One's aid. Chansok replied that he shouldn't have sympathized and rushed to help others, because he says this not because he doesn't understand what emotions people felt in such moments, but he says it this way because he knew the outcome. Chansok emphasized that in their world some deaths were inevitable and that it was worth accepting. Chansok emphasized that when a person encountered death, it didn't matter what he thought or what he felt because he was still dying. Changsik advised the hunters not to be distracted by desperate situations because with such an attitude they were not destined to survive for long. With this attitude, the 3 of them continued their journey and soon reached the temple. Changsik carefully opened the door with his foot. It was dark inside. Changsik noted that the building suited them and there were no traces of the creatures anywhere, to which Han Sang-ah breathed a sigh of relief. Changsik approached Kim Min-jae, who was looking around, and asked if he saw anything, to which he replied that he saw very poorly because it was too dark. Fortunately, the hunter could see the location of the other hunters thanks to the light. Changsik thought that using the light was dangerous because it would reveal the location. If it had been just one small detail, revealing the location wouldn't have been a big deal. But there was a risk that another thug might show up. Chansok decided that it was worth sending a warning to the hunters anyway and sent a message to all team members. In the message, Chansok noted that given the level of the monsters encountered, there was a possibility that the alpha dispersing rift had grown to the 3rd class and the use of fires could lead to a dangerous situation, and asked to refrain from using them. After a short rest, Changsik and the hunters began to consider their next move. The question was, would all the creatures disappear if the core of the corrosive rift were destroyed? Kim Min-jae explained that the creatures should have disappeared because without the energy being studied by the corrosive rift, the zone of corruption would disappear, and this seemed very simple to Changsik. Changsik decided that, in that case, he simply needed to destroy the rift. To begin with, everyone needed to rest, and the hunters settled down to rest for a little nap. Kim Min-jae and Han Sang-ah fell asleep very quickly, but not Changsik. Changsik placed the device next to Kim Min-jae and walked out into the courtyard. Chansok was going to go and destroy the rift himself. I hope the device was supposed to alert everyone to the danger. I just hope everything goes well. Chansok left the camp. Chansok thought that it was very good that at the briefing he clarified the location of the alpha corrosive rift, believing that at this rate everything could end easily and simply. After a short journey, Changsik quickly encountered something dangerous. The novice hunter had to brake sharply again. There was an obstacle in his path. The boy cursed as he looked at what stood before him. He was outraged that he had jinxed himself. The young man heard the growl again, but it was slightly different from the goblin leaders. Changsik was ready to fight. The young man had to determine from which direction the danger came. It turned out that it wasn't so difficult to determine where the monster was. Changsik encountered was even bigger than before. He had never seen anything like it before. The command post of the hunting association on the island was informed that the signals of several hunters from the 5th team had been lost, and it was presumed that they were already dead. There were reports of organized movement of monsters, and losses of hunters from the 3rd team were also confirmed. Many were panicking over the chaos that was unfolding. Emergencies were unfolding one after another, and reinforcements were needed. They demanded that the emergency communication system be activated and an urgent request for reinforcements be sent. The manager was also informed that someone was approaching the Alpha Corrosive Rift. There was an order to contact the hunter who was approaching the rift and tell him to stop immediately. It was quickly explained that the hunter who was approaching the rift was the rookie Yu Changsik, who actually discovered the strengthening of the Alpha Corrosive Rift. The manager asked to connect to this hunter's terminal and confirm his status. The corrosive rift's intensification was unprecedented, and Changsik was the first to grasp the situation and was now heading toward it. The manager knew that if anyone had the answer, it was this guy. Changsik at some point realized that the monster he decided to fight was much stronger and faster than he expected, and this was the first thing he said when they connected to him. Changsik started cursing without mincing his words and remarked that he'd only managed to dodge the monster's attacks because he was being himself. The hunter complained that the command staff had been too lazy to conduct a proper reconnaissance mission and promised to deal with the command staff when he got out of there. The flame of Yu Changsik's paradox in its current state was not strong enough to kill the creature that appeared. In a fight against a powerful entity, Changsik first needed to drain its life with the flames of paradox and then finish it off with his spear. Well, the creature turned out to be too fast, and it still couldn't keep up with Changsik. During the day, Changsik had used up too much of the island's mana in the fight against that bat, and now his mana was much less than usual. Since Changsik couldn't leave the island, he had to find a place on the island from which he could draw mana. Changsik longed to find the place he needed. He was able to sense everything that was nearby and discovered a place from where he could strike mana. Changsik immediately went to that place, still trying to break away from the monster that was practically biting his heels. Changsik didn't want the monster to leave him alone at all. The hunter, on the contrary, tried to do everything possible to make the monster follow him, although he wanted it not to happen so quickly. The hunter wanted to check something, and for this purpose in general, he needed the monster nearby. The command post announced that the hunter's GPS signal had been lost. The manager now knew that the newcomer Yu Changsik had entered the Alpha. Arriving at the place, Changsik noted to himself that it was much cleaner than he expected. Changsik heard that the non-class and third-class rifts weren't that big, and he wondered how big the second and first-class rifts were. The monster continued to pursue the hunter. Changsik kept his ears open and prevented the monster from getting too close. Now it was time to act, as they had completed their journey to the rift. Changsik turned to the monster and said that it was probably time for them to put an end to their relationship, noting that he didn't like clingy people at all. The monster took the conversation as an opportunity to attack and opened its huge mouth. One of the major problems with the paradox flame was that it spread to every living being besides Changsik. It was for this reason that Changsik preferred to fight strong monsters on his own, so as not to hurt anyone else. Changsik could not control whether the flames spread to allies or enemies. Therefore, if suddenly the flame of paradox could reach a level that Changsik could no longer control, it would become uncontrollable. However, in some situations like the one Changsik found himself in, it worked to his advantage. Changsik no longer tried to contain the flames, and they began to spread around. Very quickly, the flame of paradox engulfed the monster. Changsik noted that if he fought alone, then this disadvantage could be considered absent. Changsik's opinion. Flames began to flicker around Changsik again, and a haze began to form around the hunter. The hunter's body began to work with greater force. The young man's heart beat faster. Changsik absorbed spread to every corner of his body, expanding the mana pathways and making them stronger. Changsik found that it was even more effective than he thought. His physical body definitely became stronger, and he felt like he was on a completely different level. Now fighting a huge monster that was being consumed by the flames of paradox was not such a terrible decision. Suddenly the monster emitted a kind of ultrasound that immediately spread throughout the entire island. Changsik accepted these changes with a smile, perfectly understanding what the monster had planned. Changsik felt the ground shake beneath his feet. Winged monsters similar to the first one he met at the very beginning of his journey began to descend from the sky. The monster called other monsters to help. Changsik wasn't at all scared or upset. He even found the situation amusing. The hunter noted that he was very sorry that trying to overwhelm him with numbers was now completely useless. The flame of paradox became even more intense and spread around again. Chanseok was now several times stronger than he was before, although he was still far from what he was in that world. Changsik asked where the core of the corroding rift was and answered his own question, emphasizing that the core had to be the strongest monster in space. Suddenly the hunter heard someone talking to him, and he could understand these words. Some monster spoke to him in his language and asked him to stop. The hunter was in a very dangerous position and almost missed a blow from the monster from behind. Having spotted the danger in time, the hunter managed to dodge the blow and remain unharmed. The creature was armed with a huge sword that was embedded deep into the ground as the hunter jumped aside. The hunter immediately realized that this creature was waiting for the flame of paradox to die out, and was very surprised that it even knew how to speak. This was amazing intelligence. Chanseok noted that apparently her more expensive corrosive rift was very different from ordinary monsters. The hunter thought for a bit and decided that at his current level he could withstand a 4-hit combo. This should have been enough for the hunter, and he rushed into the attack. Changsik attacked the intelligent monster with his spear. The creature managed to repel the hunter's attack by blocking the spear with its sword. Well, the monster didn't expect what could happen with his weapon. The creature's sword could not withstand such a force and began to crack. Changsik explained that he was holding the double orbit spear. After these words, the monster pierced him with a spear and threw him back. Although the creature was quite intelligent, it could not think of such an option. The double orbit spear created a blue trajectory following the attack path. This trajectory perfectly repeated the first strike up to 4 times. If the hunter attacked simultaneously with the trajectory, then this is a simple technique repeating for consecutive strikes. Such a weapon gave a very strong advantage not only to anti-monsters. One might wonder what would have happened if the blue trajectory had hit with a slight delay. In that case, it would have been a tricky double spear strike that would have been difficult to dodge. Caught in a pincer movement, especially one that was out of sync, found itself in a very unpleasant situation. The enemy could do nothing to such an attack, and the attacker received an even greater advantage. The creature was doomed to make a mistake, but even a reasonable person could have become confused. Changsik still had a couple of hits left, and he noted in advance that it was all over. Having accelerated, the hunter struck again. This blow was decisive, and the creature that was the core of the rift received enormous damage. The hunter was surprised when he saw the destroyed body of the monster because he thought that this monster would simply disappear. Near the monster, the hunter found some kind of box and picked it up in his hand, trying to figure out what it was. Changsik hurried to open the box, curiosity getting the better of him. When the hunter opened the box, a smile spread across his face. He was very happy to find such a thing. You reported at the command post that the zone of corruption was spreading across the island from the alpha center of the corrosive mind. Everyone was trying to figure out what had happened to the positioning of the hunters whose signal had been lost. It soon became clear that the hunters who came to help had encountered monsters. Chaos reigned on the island, and no one knew if things could be put right. The manager looked at the screen with all the information and was completely confused. He understood that unless a miracle happened, he could stand here and watch from the screen as all the hunters died one after another. Suddenly, the manager was called because a message came from the hunter Yu Changsik, who entered the Alpha Corrosive Rift. The manager asked to display on the screen everything that the hunter said and saw that your message with the hunter said that the rift was over. The information was quickly confirmed. It was also confirmed that all the monsters encountered by the hunters had been destroyed. The manager said to himself that a miracle had indeed happened. But one thing remained unclear. No one could explain how the newcomer had managed to do such a thing. Changsik stood looking at the starry sky. He felt a very pleasant air and was very glad that everything ended this way. All the monsters got it pretty good, and not just from Changsik. Han Sang-a also fought monsters like other hunters and showed herself to be very good. Of course, at some point the girl began to worry. Her hands were held back. She was now holding the copper with both hands. Anxiety welled up within her. Han Sang-a saw that the monsters were becoming more and more numerous and began to worry that Yu Changsik had disappeared and there was no news from him. At some point, Kim Min-jae addressed her. His voice was also worried. The hunter wanted to hear from at least someone a promise that this fight would not be the last in their lives and that they would be able to get out of this island. Han Sang-ah understood that Kim Min-jae was already at his limit, although he tried not to show it. The huntress herself didn't know how much longer she could hold out. She was wounded in several places, and that made everything more difficult. The monsters kept coming. These beasts would pop out of the most unexpected places with a nasty squeal. The girl understood that she had nowhere to go and had to fight to the end. Having dealt with a few more creatures, the girl discovered that her affairs were very bad. At some point, the hunter's legs simply stopped supporting her, and she could barely stay in place, but she could no longer fight. Kim Min-jae noticed that his partner was having problems. The monsters continued to attack, and sensing the weakness of one of the hunters, they did so with even greater enthusiasm. At some point, Kim Min-jae thought that there was no longer any hope of returning home and that they would probably die. The hunters were faced with the prospect of something incredible. Each had to surpass their own strength, something they could never have imagined before. Han Sang-ah had already forgiven these people with his life at some point, but the blow never came, nor did he feel the sharp teeth of the monster. The girl opened one eye and looked ahead with great surprise. The monster that was about to grab her was killed by Kim Min-jae, and the rest of the monsters simply disappeared. Soon all the hunters gathered at the gathering point. Chanseok arrived at the scene, and after looking around I noticed that there were many wounded and assumed that apparently while he was gone the creatures of the rift had simply gone berserk. The team members who had simply decided to leave Chanseok were very surprised to see him again, but now they knew something astonishing about him, although they couldn't believe that this guy had single-handedly closed a third-tier corrosive rift. Few believed that the newcomer was truly capable of such a thing, but the facts spoke to the contrary. Chanseok was spotted by Kim Min-jae and Han Sang-ah and waved to him. Chanseok was glad to see the hunters alive, albeit wounded. Kim Min-jae immediately noted that he was shocked to see his message and asked how he even got the idea to go and close the Alpha Corrosive Rift alone. Chanseok replied that his heart had moved him to save the hunters. Chanseok sat down next to the team members and reflected on how well everything had ended. And he had to pretend. Chanseok admitted that if he'd known how the whole situation would turn out, he would have set out before sunset. Before he could finish his thoughts to the hunters, he heard his name being called. The manager approached him. The man introduced himself as Byun Jongtae. He was the governor of the 3rd Department of the Northern Province of Gyeonggi Incheon. Chanson immediately emphasized that apparently the manager would be the person who exiled him to this island. The manager asked Chanseok to give him a minute of his time and explained that the mayor wanted to talk to him, so they went to see him. Chanseok, having agreed to talk to the mayor, was still indignant to himself that this was precisely in order. I was wondering whether it was the habit of all old people to give orders or only some. Chanseok was thinking about the fact that the contract didn't specify how much money he would receive for closing the 3rd-tier corrosive rift and decided that since he was here he should bargain. Near the entrance to the building, Chanseok was met by a man who said that he was very glad to see him. The man introduced himself as Lee Pilge. He was a communications officer. Lee Pilge escorted the hunter to the mayor, who was sincerely looking forward to this meeting, and admitted that the report on the island he had received early in the morning had greatly shocked him. Lee Piljae also noted that the mayor, after seeing the peninsula's report, canceled all meetings for the morning and wanted to meet with the hunter. Chong-suk noted that they could have met with the mayor later, emphasizing that he hadn't done anything remarkable. Lee Pilge asked the hunter not to talk about himself. After all, the newbie on his first mission single-handedly destroyed a 3rd-class corrosive rift, and something like that hadn't happened since the time of the great pioneer's first hunter. Chanseok still accepted this information because it seemed like it. Even he had a hard time closing the rift alone, and if he thought about the previous similar precedent, that guy was a real monster. As soon as the mayor saw the hunter, he immediately thanked him for his work and invited him in. Park Gon, the mayor of Incheon, smiled at the hunter and apologized for calling him in such foul weather. Mark asked the hunter to sit down and asked Lee Pilge to bring them coffee. Lee Pilge very soon brought 2 cups of black coffee, and the mayor, turning to the hunter, noted that he had rendered a great service to the country. Park Gon noted that as mayor he acknowledged that the island was a real thorn in the side and should have been dealt with long ago, but explained that the budget was not unlimited and that hiring an expensive guild was unrealistic. Pak Gon agreed with the hunter's remark that it cost him the bare minimum but nevertheless changed the subject to the fact that this was the hunter's first task, which he confirmed. Pak Gon emphasized that it was incredible and the first steps of such a great man were right here in their city, and he as mayor is certainly proud of this. Pak Gon began to say that the safest country in the world was the Republic of Korea, and his city was one of the key regions of Korea, which greatly surprised Changsik, who wondered to himself why the mayor would suddenly decide that. Pak Gon noted that this was all due to the countless goods coming and going through the excellent infrastructure of Incheon Airport and also thanks to the Free Economic Zone project. In international cities like Songdo and Jiana, there were many foreigners living, each of whom wanted to finance something. Pak Gon said that huge amounts of money were passing through the major cities of his city, and goods were sent through the airport. After some time, Pak Gon got to the point where he began to tell the hunter that with his help his path as a hunter would soar. Pak Gon looked the hunter in the eyes and asked to be allowed to ask just one question. The mayor asked the young man why he'd decided to become a hunter. He'd already answered that question. Changsik mentioned a clogged toilet that had started spewing waste and noted that someone needed to dive into the waste and clear the clog. The person asking about this was satisfied with the answer he received. The man who asked this question promised Changsik that he would become famous, as such capable hunters are extremely rare. He was promised that various corporations would woo him to appear in commercials for their products and that he would be invited to appear on various popular shows. Chanseok noted that the man was apparently worried that he might have changed due to the fame that had befallen him, to which the man agreed, noting that no promising hunter was blinded by the glitter of fame and lost the ability to see his duty. The man also emphasized that however this was completely natural and that immediately beyond the threshold a multitude of monsters were waiting in the corrosive rift. According to the man, the only safe zone was Korea, and it was even sometimes called the last sanctuary on Earth, but even such a place was distorted by the power of capital. The man said that what Changsik did was simply incredible, and many people in difficult situations would watch him with interest. The manager really hoped that the hunter would continue to be a symbol of hope and would not leave this path. Changsik was curious to see how far everyone would go after what he heard. Pak Gon didn't even try to hide his intentions and laid his cards on the table. But luckily for him, Changsik couldn't be confused by this. Changsik lived a long life and experienced many hardships. The young man directly asked what the mayor wanted in return if he was going to provide him with such comprehensive support. Changsuk immediately guessed that the mayor wanted help with his slumping approval ratings and to be re-elected for a second year. Pak Gon wanted exactly that and was very embarrassed to hear it from the hunter. Pak Gon sat back down in his chair and, clearing his throat, noted that the young man was well informed. Changsik replied that in these times so much could be found on a phone, and he found out that the mayor's term was ending at the beginning of next year, and given how things were going for him, the general opinion was that his chances of re-election were minimal. Pak Gon smiled, emphasizing that since the hunter had spoken directly to him, he would too, and asked if he didn't need the administration's approval to participate in that mission. Chanson thought that a newbie like him really needed the mayor's permission to participate in that mission, and if the mayor played it well, he would be seen as a talent discovered in his city, or more precisely a talent discovered by his mayor. According to Changsik, the mayor simply wanted to ride on his back for a second term, nothing more. The mayor stated that he maintained connections with many foreign and domestic companies thanks to the aforementioned infrastructure. The mayor gave the example of a model for an instant coffee commercial whose contract was about to expire and they could replace her face with that of a hunter. Changsik finished his coffee and loudly put the cup down on the table, interrupting the mayor. Changsik looked the mayor in the eyes and noted that he seemed to see him as cheap. The mayor was a little confused and demanded an explanation, to which the hunter immediately noted that looking at the news lately he realized that the world needed someone who could change the gloomy atmosphere and needed a new face. This meant that if someone like him continued to work as a hunter, he would receive everything the mayor had promised him in any case. Chanseok was right about that. He generally didn't need to strain himself too much or adapt to someone else's needs to gain benefits that would be his anyway. Pak Gon noted that he could provide the hunter with safe and highly paid tasks, and could choose them and give them to him, but Changsik replied that he was not interested in such an offer either. Chanseok now understood the chairs and, hurrying to the exit, advised the mayor to simply congratulate his model for the coffee advertisement. Modi couldn't renew her contract because Chanseok had absolutely no intention of agreeing to such conditions. Changsik stepped outside. The rain continued to pour and the sun made no attempt to break through the overcast sky. Around the corner, two men were talking. They didn't even try to hide from the rain. One of the men standing in the hood heard that the test on the island had failed, for which the other man apologized. The man who apologized also noted that he had good news. The man in the hood asked what kind, and another gave him a recording of the hunter's examination tournament. The recording featured Yu Changsik and his flame that amazed everyone. The hooded man smirked, agreeing that this guy was really good. The first day of every month was a moment that the whole country looked forward to. On this day, everyone was constantly using their gadgets and sharing news with each other. Even children ran up to their parents, showing them smartphone screens. Everyone was eagerly awaiting the hunter rankings update. Everyone was incredibly curious to see who was now at the top. Usually the rankings didn't change much, so they often served as entertainment for the crowd, but not this time. Kim Min-jae woke up in a very good mood and immediately turned on the TV, where the ratings were supposed to appear. See Mr. President Moon Chung-tae and gave him the world ranking of hunters for the month of September. Lee Seon also picked up her phone immediately after the fight with the monsters, wondering if that guy was in this ranking. Chanseok didn't see anything wrong with it. He was neutral about the fact that they were trying to turn the ratings update into a show. Chanseok himself, the most important thing was only the top 10. Se-yeon came in 10th. When the rankings were released, several members of her team approached her and noted that the tents had been set up. Shahyun took 5th place. Choi came in 3rd place. Urium. 2nd place went to Yang Tae-sok. But the crowd was most interested in who ranked first. Yu Changsik was called out and distracted from his thoughts. The man noted that Chanseok had been waiting for a long time and could go. Chanseok answered the man that he understood everything and continued looking for information about himself. When Changsik entered the office, the first thing he was congratulated on was his record-breaking ranking. A veteran with 5 years of experience single-handedly destroying a Class 3 corrosive rift. It was such a common occurrence that such events went unnoticed in the hunting community. But if instead of a veteran it had been a rookie on his first mission, it would have been a completely different story. Now the rookie hunter faced a lot of questions about how he'd managed to achieve such results. Chanseok felt like a kid on one of those shows about young geniuses. Sighing, the young man replied that he had a schedule and would answer one last question. The journalists didn't let up. Each one shouted out that many people were interested in his next steps as a hunter and he needed to share his thinking. Chanseok replied that he would not stoop to cliches like people who promised to try their best. Chanseok promised that he would show everything with his results and soon everyone would know about it. Yu Chang-suk found himself in a helicopter. He was shown that right below them was the former Gonkel prison. The helicopter flew over a completely destroyed city with a huge black bottomless hole. Changsik looked out the window while the man told him about this horrific sight and about rumors that this was common abroad, and that after the appearance of corrosive faults most countries lost their administrative capabilities. President Moon Chung-tae noted that South Korea was the only country that not only managed to effectively protect its people, but also made several technological breakthroughs. At the very least, the helicopter they were flying on was part of this technological breakthrough since it operated on mana. Changsik asked if this meant that countries that failed to overcome their faults ended up like this, and the president confirmed this, adding that many stages disappeared after the corrosive faults appeared. Soon the helicopter landed and Moon Jong-tae invited Changsik to take a closer look at the city. Once outside, the man noted that they were being presented with the G8, explaining that there were 8 of the most corrosive faults in the world, and one of them was the Gonkel prison. 13 years ago, without any warning or symptoms, a corrosive rift suddenly appeared in Gonkel prison and spread in a huge circle throughout the city. Some people barely managed to survive. In a place that had been turned into a corrosive zone, people were quickly swept away without even a chance to escape. In just a few days, an entire city disappeared. Moon Chante noted that despite the emergence of corrosive fault lines, the influence between the countries has not changed much, but the internal strength of the central authorities has weakened. Chanseok noted to himself that it was still nice to learn something he didn't know before, but he still didn't understand why he was called to this place. The president mentioned that a few days ago he was found by Yoon Sung-hyun from Taebaek, who seemed to be unhappy that Chang-suk. Chanseok remembered the big guy who even dared to threaten a little. The president noted that Yoon Sung-hyun suddenly asked him about Chang-suk's whereabouts. Hearing this, the hunter became furious. The president noted that since this would have been personal information in Crete, he did not say anything, but the Taebaek Guild professed the ideology of the survival of the strongest, and therefore they could have tried to force Chang-suk. Chang-sik knew that this could be a problem for him, but he wasn't yet able to defeat this guy with brute force. Moon Jongtae emphasized that apparently Chang-sik, judging by his actions, preferred to act independently rather than join any guild, and Chang-sik agreed with this. The president noted that if Chang-sik wanted to not be afraid of Taibik, then he should have bought his position, for example, by carrying out important tasks proposed by the president of the organization and handed the papers to the hunter. Chang-sik thought that he had no doubt that the president had his own motives and asked directly what his benefit was. The president looked at the hunter and said that the fact that he had helped him simply had to be remembered. Chang-sik accepted the papers, thinking that everything was not so difficult, and besides, this task from the president would be useful for his reputation. Chang-sik asked what he was supposed to do, and the president explained that the task was to protect a cargo ship en route from Busan to Nanning, since the corrosive zones made it difficult to transport essential goods. Chang-sik reread the papers and noted that the ship was carrying Rolex fine porcelain aged alcohol pure cars, and apparently the basic necessities had changed a lot over the past 20 years. Moon Chante emphasized that some people needed these goods and wondered why the hunter specified 20 years. Chang-sik replied that he did not understand why such things happened in a country where the central government was divided. Moon Chante explained that although many countries collapsed due to corrosive fault lines, interethnic politics remained. Chang-sik decided that all this was necessary to maintain certain relations between the countries, and therefore it was necessary to grease someone's palms, and without thinking refused the president. Moon Chongtae asked the hunter to take his time and emphasized the importance of this matter for the Korean government. Chang-sik assured that even so he would not change his decision, since it would be foolish for a single person to get involved in politics. Moon Jongtae, warning that his remarks might sound harsh, said that Chang-sik was just a rookie who was just starting his career, and it seemed that the excessive attention had become toxic for him. Chang-suk couldn't stand this treatment and opened the helicopter doors, intending to exit. He tossed the papers into the air, sending them flying. Chang-suk thanked the president for the helicopter ride. Chang-sik remarked that he could swim to Seoul on his own. The president was shocked but was unable to stop the hunter. Chang-sik simply jumped out of the helicopter no matter what and flew down. The president looked out at Chang-sik, fully understanding what the hunter had done. Chang-sik fell into the water, causing high splashes. Moon Kanti said to himself that the youth had become very daring. The port of Incheon operated as usual. One of the workers went out for a coffee break and noticed something strange. The worker saw the water bubbling near the shore and began to watch with interest. Suddenly a hand shot out of the water and grabbed the edge of the pier. Chang-sik pulled his body higher and exhaled. He was very tired from swimming for so long. Chang-sik immediately turned to the worker and began to complain that he was being threatened. The worker, looking at the guy who appeared out of nowhere from the water, noted that he had no idea what had happened to him, but he understood perfectly well that he was having a bad day. Now Chang-sik needed to build up his strength because it was obvious that he would have to defend himself. Chang-sik decided to focus on the hardest tasks that no one wanted to take on in order to become a big shot. Chang-sik didn't want anyone else to tell him what to do. After looking through the available tasks, Chang-sik stopped at one, believing that it was what he needed. Chang-sik accepted the mission where the Victim Assistance Association was asking for help. The expected rift rank was second. Chang-sik sighed and stared at the sunset. Chang-sik thought about how busy he would be in the near future. On September 3rd, during shrimp season, fishermen from Jeoju Island and Tongyeong City went out to sea. However, that day the sea was different from usual. The corrosive creatures that nested on Tsushima Island appeared and kidnapped the fishermen as if hunting them. According to the survivor, who barely managed to escape, the kidnapped fishermen were still alive. Someone had to go to Tsushima Island and rescue the captured fishermen and destroy the corrosive rift. Chang-sik continued to look at the various hunter missions and choose the most difficult ones. The reward for rescuing the fishermen was 55 million won if the task was completed alone. Chang-sik thought that if he received this entire sum himself, it would be quite a lot of money. Chang-sik thought that besides, if he succeeded, it would be a heroic story that could bring great fame. The risk was worth it, and Chang-sik wondered if he should have agreed to this task. Chang-sik had heard that the power of corrosive beasts varied significantly depending on their rank and rift. While a rank 3 corrosive rift was comparable in strength to a tank, a creature from a rank 2 rift was a walking disaster. In the case of first rank rifts, the entire army of an entire country was required to destroy one creature from it. Chang-sik thought that the third rank rift would not be a problem since he used paradox flames, but he doubted that he could handle the second rank. Someone useful would be needed, but someone like that would not even look at such a civilian request. After scrolling through the phone a little more, Changseok finally found one girl he could take with him. Soon it was time to set out. Changseok was fully prepared and looked ahead where the sky and sea met on the horizon. They approached the hunter from behind and called his name. Han Sang-ah, the huntress Changseok had taken with him, asked how far they were to Tsushima Island. Why, the back of the head Chosok replied that the road should have taken about another hour. Chang-suk advised Sang-ah to rest before their arrival on the island, as the battle was expected to be more difficult than last time. Seeing the huntress's lack of concentration, Chang-suk asked if she'd even been listening to him. Sang-ah looked at Changseok's shoulder pad and couldn't take her eyes off it. As she approached Changseok, Sang-ah noticed that he was wearing the Iron Seraph's pauldron, and judging by the leather tip and aesthetics it was a limited edition, and then asked where Changseok got it. Outraged by his partner's talkativeness, Changseok nevertheless told him that the shoulder pad was given to him by the garbage man, with whom they had a contract, to which Sang-ah complained that her garbage men had not given her anything. Changseok noted with a laugh that the girl shouldn't have been so surprised, because she was a bird of a different feather than he, a rising star who had single-handedly cleared a third-rank rift. Looking at Sang-ah's angry gaze, Changseok noted that she could become stronger and famous if she didn't like her position as a newbie and just an excellent student at the academy, which angered the girl even more. A few days ago, Changseok contacted Sang-ah and explained that he needed a partner. Sang-ah was puzzled that Changseok called her. The huntress was at a loss, because those who did not die in the corrosive rift of the third rank, and the text he wanted to go to the rift of the second rank. Changseok waited patiently for Sang-ah to make up her mind. Changseok asked if Sang-ah wanted to become stronger, but these words did not catch his attention. Changseok reminded her of her own words about how she could learn from him. Changseok noted that if the huntress did not go back on her words, then he could help her with her intention to become stronger. Changseok emphasized that if he trained Sang-ah, she could become several times stronger than she was. After some thought, Sang-ah directly asked Changseok to tell her what he had planned. Sang-ah had a reason to become stronger, and that was the only reason she paid attention to this offer. In order to get out of her current situation, the girl was ready to take a risk. Sang-ah was ready to jump into hell if that was what it took. The ship's siren sounded. A voice came from the loudspeaker. There was an unidentified object straight ahead that could very well be dangerous. Sang-ah was surprised by the ship, but Changseok noted that there were as many as 5 ships on course. Chang-sok began to think how they could get onto the ships, and since Das was a civilian, it was worth acting covertly. Changseok turned to Sang-ah and noted that she seemed to have a suitable skill, and found that she was levitating in the air. Changseok was surprised that the girl had such a skill, but asked her not to tell him that Changseok couldn't do it either. Changseok remained silent. This meant that he didn't have such talent. Chana smiled, glad that there was at least something that Changseok couldn't do. Chana remarked that flying was easy and laughed again. Changseok reacted badly as it triggered old wounds. There was not much choice, and so we had to make our way across the seas only thanks to Sang-ah. Changseok held on to Sang-ah, who could barely support his weight, and was dragging him along the water, to which he was indignant, noting that he had not yet learned to walk on water. Changseok looked forward and tensed. Changseok asked Sang-ah to take care of the nearest ship, to which the girl asked why he was doing that. Chang-sok replied that he felt Manu, and the further he went the more energy the ships emitted and the more dangerous they were. Sang-ah didn't ask any more questions, and having simply said that she understood everything, began to carry out the assignment. As they approached the ship, Sang-ah became tense. The huntress managed to make out a human silhouette on board. Changseok asked the huntress to close her eyes and look again, replying that it was definitely not a human. Jumping towards the ship and grabbing the weapon, Changseok emphasized that the creature's movements were not human. The hunters came across a bandaged head that growled, although it looked like a mummy. Chang-ah landed on board the ship first. Changseok landed after Sang-ah and noted that if the girl were to land like that, she would break her knees. Changseok also drew attention to the huntress in front of him and emphasized that she was also attracting unnecessary attention to herself. Changseok kicked the side of the boat hard. Sang-ah was momentarily confused because there were so many monsters. Thanks to Changseok, a lot of monsters ended up with their heads broken. Changseok was glad that the creatures were not of a high level, guessing that they were around the bottom of the second rank. Overjoyed, Changseok thought that he and Sang-ah would be able to break through. Turning his attention to Han Sang-ah, Changseok discovered that the girl was hitting at full strength. Changseok called out to the girl, thinking that she was very much mistaken. Changseok explained to the huntress that she had used too much mana, and at this rate she could run out very quickly. Chanseok emphasized that for the level of enemies a lower level of power was sufficient. Changsik knew Han Sang-a could become several times stronger than she was if he trained her. But the girl didn't always want to listen to him. Han Sang-a continued to hit as she saw fit, using up mana no matter how much Changsik scolded her. Changsik noted that the huntress was still taking too much power and was already getting nervous. Changsik asked the girl to reduce the power more and more until he was satisfied with the result. Sang-a was very unhappy with the amount of criticism directed at her, but she understood that she should have trusted a hunter stronger than herself and given herself a chance. The life of the weak was a tragedy, endless cold and darkness. Han Sang-a couldn't allow herself to become weak again and knew she had to become much stronger. A monster appeared right in front of the girl, though she didn't see it right away. She quickly came to her senses. She had a reason for her strength. She knew that when she grew stronger she would leap into hell. The skeletons filled the ship in huge numbers, and their numbers seemed to keep growing. One after another they continued to advance from all sides, giving no respite. Han Sang-a was already exhausted, but she did not give up. Changsik reappeared on board. Coming closer, he looked calmly at her and asked if she had finished her task and dealt with what was happening on the ship. Changsik calmly noted that he had already dealt with all the other ships. Then he nodded slightly and gestured behind him, indicating that the threat behind him had been completely eliminated. Sana replied that there was no way she could be stubborn in such a situation. The huntress thanked Changsik for his advice, emphasizing that she had learned a lot from him, to which he replied that there was no need to thank him because the world was full of idiots who would not be able to learn his lessons even if he stripped them naked and put them in their mouths. Sang-a admitted to Changsik that he was the first person to ever give her advice. Changsik asked what she meant, as he was certain the academy was created to teach and that upperclassmen and advisors were supposed to help. Han Sang-a said she learned everything so quickly that others said it was annoying. Chong Suk hoped Sang-a didn't think that if she followed his advice she would one day surpass him. Sang-a looked up and said that she had never had a teacher she had not surpassed. Changsik felt very awkward upon hearing this. He was a little taken aback and for a moment didn't know what to say because the words had come so unexpectedly to him. Changsik asked Sang-a not to worry about it, promising that nothing like that would happen to him. He was sure Sang-a would look up to him for the rest of her life, to which she replied that she wasn't particularly bothered by that response. Soon the ship touched down. Two men boarded the ship and, appearing before Changsik, immediately stopped in front of him. They stood up straight and saluted solemnly, showing respect. The men noted that they would continue to wait on Geoj Island and wished the hunters good luck, to which Changsik wished them to continue in the same spirit. Chansok noted that according to the survivor the hostages were in the temple. Sane emphasized that there were two temples on the island called Gaijin and Atazumi respectively. Chanseok emphasized that the Gaijin temple was closer to him and they would go there first, to which the huntress noted that they could run to that temple in a couple of hours. Changsik thought that the problem was that they would get to the temple while it was light, but the journey back was a completely different story. According to the report, there were only 15 hostages, and getting out with them in the dark, especially if they were wounded, would not be easy. Moreover, Changsik felt the ominous mana in the fog tingling his skin. Corrosive creatures pursued him and San across the island. Changsik thought that in order to escape the attack during the evacuation, and in principle to be able to return to a safe place with the fishermen, they needed transportation, which he told Sanae about. Changsik asked if Han Sang-a knew how to drive after looking at the small bus, and the girl replied that she knew how. Changsik quickly put his idea into practice, and soon the hunters were racing on a bus. Changsik held on tightly to everything he could, trying to find out where Han Sang-a learned to drive like that. Changsik was indignant that the brakes were just an empty space or decoration for Sang-a, but the girl warned that if her partner didn't say anything she would drive the car herself. Clinging to the side of the car, Chanseok asked San-a to forget about everything and fell silent. A little later, Changsik said that reckless driving was still better than what he would have shown, whose license had been gathering dust for 20 years. Changsik also emphasized that he was still a better fighter than his partner who drove like that. But the conversation had to be abruptly interrupted as enemies loomed ahead. Changsik stood on the roof of the car and swung a rope with a spear blade at the end. Choosing the right moment, Chanseok threw a spear on a rope into the crowd of monsters. The spear clearly pierced the bony skulls of the revived mummies. Changsik pulled the rope tightly and tried to get it back into his hands. The rope didn't give way. Changsik felt a strong pull. Changsik just chuckled at how strong the skeleton was that its torso wouldn't let the spear tip back in. Changsik heard some additional sounds and realized that another danger had been added. Changsik warned Han Sang-ah that there was danger to her left and prepared himself for battle. Han Sang-ah asked Changsik to leave the skeletons with her. She wanted to deal with them herself. The huntress gripped the steering wheel of the car even tighter and turned it sharply. Changsik was very surprised. He had already guessed what the huntress wanted to do. The girl simply drove straight ahead and left dozens of skeletons under the wheels of the car. Han Sang-ah laughed loudly, noting that she could roll all her enemies into the asphalt. Changsik began to doubt that he had done the right thing by letting Han Sang-ah drive the car. For a very long time, the huntress did not slow down, making her way further and further across the island. The dirt road vibrated under the wheels of the bus driven by Han Sang-ah. A crowd of skeletons and other strange creatures followed the bus. Some of the monsters even managed to escape. Han Sang-ah shouted that she saw the temple and was going inside, to which Changsik asked what they were supposed to do with the monsters behind them. Han Sang-ah agreed that Changsik would deal with them, although she wasn't thrilled about it. Changsik opened the car door slightly while the car was moving, thinking that he would be able to jump out. Han Sang-ah warned Changsik that she would continue driving without stopping. Changsik had no problem with his partner's decision. He was focused on his goal. Changsik decided it was time to use the Flame of Paradox since the monsters were still not lagging behind. Changsik himself was practically invisible behind the black flames. Right at the gates of the temple, Changsik struck the ground with his spear and the flames spread even faster around. Changsik would just have to burn off the friction force on the steps. Changsik stayed near the gate for a little while longer to make sure that everything was going according to his plan. Having made sure that everything was working as it should, and that there were no other obstacles, the hunter quickly headed after his partner, deciding not to waste time and to catch up with her as quickly as possible. By that time, Han Sang-ah had already found the prisoners. They were tied up and had clearly been that way for a long time. The huntress approached the group of captives and asked if they were okay. The prisoners never expected to hear a human voice. At first, many didn't even believe what was happening was real. Han Sang-ah introduced herself and noted that she was from the hunting association. The man looked up at her and froze. The next moment, the man screamed loudly but suddenly shut up. A few seconds later, the man screamed again but much louder and longer. Han Sang-ah panicked. She waved her hands and tried to calm the screaming man and explained that she had come to save him. The man began to cry and asked the girl to leave that place as quickly as possible. Han Sang-ah didn't understand what the man was talking about and asked him to explain. It was at that moment that the girl felt a heavy presence behind her. Turning around, she realized it was a huge brute standing behind her who had crept up quietly and was now looming right behind her. Changsik appeared. He immediately drew the big guy's attention to himself, distracting him from the girl and preventing him from attacking her. Changsik turned to Han Sang-ah and asked her to take the survivors to the car, noting that he would deal with the thug himself. The brute immediately attacked Changsik, who barely managed to avoid the blow. Changsik moved confidently, as if he knew all the monster's movements in advance. The brute attacked again and again, swinging his axe high even from behind his back. Changsik managed to block the big guy's punch and withstand his onslaught. Changsik held on. He understood that he simply could not miss even one blow. The brute did not stop and attacked continuously. Changsik was not worried at all, although the opponent was indeed very dangerous. Han Sang-ah's voice was heard loudly wishing death on the monster. After Han Sang-ah's scream, the thug found himself lying on the ground. Changsik was very surprised and even shocked when he saw Han Sang-ah in the car. Looking into the car, Changsik turned to the huntress and warned that once they returned home, she would never get behind the wheel of a car again, and asked her to swear on her little finger, to which the girl asked him to get in quickly. As the car started moving, Changsik asked Han Sang-ah where the hostages were, and the huntress replied that everyone was on board. Han Sang-ah was driving carefully, but suddenly something rarely puzzled her. The huntress turned to Changsik and asked him to look forward carefully, and the hunter's face immediately changed. Ahead from the darkness, a multitude of blood-red bright eyes looked at the hunters. The skeletons were on their way to Changsik and Han Sang-ah. The skeletons' eyes glowed in the dark, making them even more terrifying. Changsik suggested that the skeletons seemed to have survived their recent close encounter with a car, as they looked quite dented. At one point, point, Yu Changsik asked Sang-ah to lend him her sword, which surprised the girl. The girl was indignant, noting that Yu Changsik should have understood what an insult it was for a swordsman to give up his sword, but it was clear from the approaching skeletons that there was little choice. Yu Changsik also emphasized that it was necessary to choose between the honor of a swordsman and the lives of people, and Sang-ah should have known perfectly well which was more important. The girl didn't think for long, and after a very short time Yu Changsik received the sword he wanted. Yu Changsik was going to fight the skeletons from the roof of the car without going down to the ground. Looking ahead, Yu Changsik noted that he never thought that he would have to resort to something so soon. A few days ago, Yu Changsik was near a third-class corrosive fault on Kidando Island. The hunter encountered something interesting on his way, and he couldn't pass it by. Yu Changsik's attention was drawn to a glove that was simply lying on the ground. Yu Changsik picked up the glove and tried it on to see that, as he had expected, it was not an ordinary glove. The glove that Yu Changsik found collected mana from the atmosphere. Yu Changsik thought that, judging by the purpose of the glove, it was originally a starting equipment needed to replenish mana. For Yu Changsik, the glove he found became more than just a help in replenishing his mana. Given the maximum mana capacity of this glove-shaped mana battery, it lasted for 5 minutes. In those 5 minutes, Yu Changsik was comparable in strength to Lee Se-yun. Yu Changsik gained an unimaginable advantage when he could replenish his mana further. On the bracelet, Yu Changsik could see the degree of mana absorption and could control his fight based on this. The hunter knew when it was time to use the maximum of his strength and when it was time to look for a safe zone. When Yu Changsik and Han Sang-ah found themselves in the midst of the skeleton army, Changsik used his gloves and showed incredible fighting ability. Han Sang-ah couldn't believe her own eyes when Changsik said something like that. The speed at which Changsik reduced the number of skeletons was unimaginable. At some point, Changsik noted that he and Han Sang-ah should go straight to the port now. After a short time, Han Sang-ah and Yu Changsik found themselves at Hadakatsu port. At the port, another battle awaited the hunters, in which Changsik was indignant because he thought that they had already managed to get rid of those bastards. The hunter sincerely did not understand where all these monsters were coming from. Han Sang-ah noted that the car was traveling at top speed and suggested stopping and sorting things out. Yu Changsik asked the girl to press the gas pedal even further to the floor, refusing his partner's offer. Han Sang-ah wanted to be indignant that at this rate they could end up in a situation where their car was broken at any moment, but she still picked up the speed. The fact that the huntress decided to listen to her partner played a big role, and he managed to break away just in time and let me give one of the skeletons a chance to grab onto the body. The skeletons kept trying to catch up with the car, and the hunters had a hard time breaking away from them. Han Sang-ah saw in the mirror what the acceleration of the car had done and decided not to be indignant at any of Yu Changsik's requests anymore. The car was racing at incredible speed. Han Sang-ah, it turned out, was a truly skilled driver for such extreme situations, but her partner would never have admitted it. Han Sang-ah thought about how the creatures that had recently been following them seemed to have crashed into some kind of obstacle at some point. The huntress tried to figure out the reason. She knew perfectly well that it lay in something her partner had done. Yu Changsik was indeed responsible for them being able to slow down the monster army. The hunter used a geometric defensive formation, and Han Sang-ah told him about it. The girl, it turned out, had never heard of it and asked Changsik to explain what it was. The hunter replied that, in simple terms, it was a drawing technique that warded off monsters. Sang-ah asked her partner where he learned this drawing, and he replied that even if he could say that the girl still would not be able to repeat it, he thought to himself that it would only be because he learned it in another world. Yu Changsik continued to praise himself for his skills getting better and better, which made Sang-ah even more angry. The huntress did not relent and asked whether the geometric defensive formation was capable of repelling any monster. Yu Changsik answered the guy that he really wanted this skill to scare away any monster, but unfortunately it didn't work that way. Yu Changsik explained that the geometric defensive formation didn't work on real monsters like the big guy they were about to fight. The defensive formation had no effect at all on more intelligent creatures than just a stupid animal or skeletons that were simply running after their target. Sang-ah looked somewhere to the side and started talking about some eye of reason. Yu Changsik didn't know what his partner was talking about, but he thought that he felt goosebumps on his skin and couldn't understand whether he was really cold or if it was from fear, although the monster didn't seem that scary. Sang-ah said that the eye of the mind opened her eyes to a new sense beyond the 5 senses. And it was the ability to anticipate an opponent's attacks. Sang-ah emphasized that this technique was difficult even for masters. Her hands trembled, but she held the sword firmly. The huntress tried to calm her fear. She was genuinely afraid they wouldn't win the upcoming battle. Yu Chang-suk stood next to her partner and asked her not to be afraid. His voice sounded very confident, as if he knew something she didn't know. Yu Chang-sik pointed out to Sang-ah that techniques like the Eye of Magnus were just tricks, and there was no need to be afraid of them but just to watch him closely. Chan-seok promised his partner that he would learn how to get through with such things. The hunter assessed the situation. He was ready to attack, but first he wanted to choose the best time to do so. Chan-seok waited until the monster rushed to attack himself and only then went towards him. Sang-ah didn't understand why Chang-seok was going to go but the monster alone. Chan-seok replied to the guy that she should have understood that the commander had experience gained in countless battles and also acquired reflexes thanks to this. The hunter noted that since the mind's eye responded unconsciously to aggression and fear, simply projecting murderous intent would have left the monster in a deplorable state. Chang-seok spoke about the eye of the mind, the sword of the heart, and the state of selflessness. Coming closer and closer to the monster, the hunter noted that the unity of man and sword, the meridians of streams rotating towards the source eye, emphasized that all this was the so-called kingdoms. Chan-seok was already very close to the monster, which turned out to be many times larger than himself. The monster was preparing to attack. The giant was wearing armor and wielding a huge sword. It seemed as if the hunter would be wiped out by such a giant's blow, but in an instant the giant was dead. With literally a single swing of the ball, the hunter managed to chop the monster into many pieces. Yu Chang-seok turned to his partner and noted that in all the kingdoms he listed and in their tricks there was nothing really wrong and there was no need to be afraid of it. The illusion of so-called enlightenment was terrifying. The man rejoiced at receiving a special title and decided that it was enough, thus limiting himself. What was important on the battlefield didn't need a fancy title. Yu Chang-seok was confident that he had the right to say this. Yu Chang-seok thinks so because he himself managed to avoid this trap only at the cost of numerous sacrifices. Yu Chang-suk emphasized to his partners that this monster was able to survive after being run over by a car, but unfortunately his ultimate ability was the eye of the mind. At that very moment, Sanae wondered what she had achieved on this mission. Although the huntress told herself that she had reached her limit, Yu Chang-seok's strength far exceeded the one she had imagined. The girl understood very clearly that she could not become the best by working half-heartedly as she did on this task. The huntress looked at her partner and understood that she still had a lot to do for her strength. At some point, the huntress asked if she could ask something important to her. The girl asked Yu Chang-seok to teach her for real and emphasized that she was ready for this.